Welcome back to an episode of The Bonecast, a podcast where we talk all things trombone with the people who love it most. Last episode, we set the stage for today's conversation by exploring the legacy of the famous jazz orchestra and its impact on the Columbus jazz scene. But right when things were about to get started, I left you all with a bit of a cliffhanger. Today, we're picking up exactly where we left off, with the man himself, Vaughn Weister. Vaughn, thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
It's an honor to be asked. The older I get, I've been interviewed and honored a good number of times. And each time it happens, I'm always aware that I'm being honored and how sweet that is. But I also know that when I'm being honored, there are at least 15 people being overlooked or forgotten who probably ought to be looked at or put into the spotlight for a minute.
Yeah, it's hard to include everyone in the conversation.
It's impossible, but I'm mindful of that.
So the best place to start is probably at the beginning. When did you first fall in love with jazz, and what drew you specifically to the trombone?
Well, I have a little pat story, but every word is true. I grew up in Mount Vernon, Ohio, about an hour north of Columbus, a town of about, at that time, 13,000. I think it's a little larger now. We had a good, strong music program in the persons of a man named Jack Stow and a man named Robert Bechtel. Bechtel was the Bach of the group. He was the guy that always knew he was the smartest guy in the room. And when I got into high school, I auditioned for and got a seat in what was thought of as a dance band. It was 6 brass, 5 reeds, and 3 rhythm. And he had a library that he had acquired over the years for that band of mostly standard material, standard songs, standard tunes in dance band arrangements. The prominent arrangers were Johnny Warrington, Art Dedrick, Frank Comstock, and Glenn Osser. Those guys were sort of at the ground floor of the publishing industries, working toward encouraging and doing business with high school band directors that wanted to have dance bands or jazz bands. And so I got to play a lot of that material, and the result there is when I got out of Mount Vernon High School, I knew a lot of tunes. Only later did I realize what I'd really gained there. And at Mount Vernon, the football and basketball teams are called the Yellow Jackets. The dance band, are you ready? The Mellow Jackets.
No way.
Yes, way. They're still known as the Mellow Jackets. It's now thought of as a jazz ensemble, not as a dance band. So they've kind of followed that national trend,
Hey, that's branding done right.
So after I'd been in the band a year, that following summer, Mr. Bechtel lived about a block and a half away from where we lived. And so one summer afternoon, I'm over at his house. We're visiting and carrying on. He made one of his usual smart remarks about Lawrence Welk. Now, I thought it's time to corner Mr. Bechtel. So I said, Mr. Bechtel, I've heard you crack on Lawrence Welk before. Me and the family, we watch Lawrence Welk every week. I don't see anything wrong with it. And he looked at me and he said, wait here. And he goes in his bedroom and he's on his hands and knees in the back of his closet. And he comes out with 6 78 RPM records from the 40s of the Stan Kenton Band, which I had never heard of.
Wow.
And he put these 78s in my hand and he looks me in the eye and all he said was, take these home and listen to them and watch Lawrence Welk next week. Now, that's the way the guy was. He would not lead you by the hand. He would not try to sell you anything. I finally distilled his message years later. His message was, do you think you're smart enough to get this? Well, needless to say, I heard Lawrence Welk with new ears the following week. And now I knew about Stan Kenton and really exciting stuff. Kenton's stuff from the 40s was pretty borderline explosive. That's revelation number 1. I also had a classmate a year younger than me. He was in my brother's class, and he was a pretty astute musician. He played cello, and he played piano, and he also was somewhat accomplished at the pipe organ. And his mother was conservatory trained at what was then called the Cincinnati Conservatory. And she was a violinist. And she knew that I was really excited about music, the big chords and stuff like that. And one day I'm over at Mrs. Carl's house visiting her son, Bob, and she steps up to me holding a record album in her hand. And she says, "I think you should take this home and listen to it." Well, on the front of the album it says, Pierre Monteau, Paris Conservatory Orchestra, Stravinsky, The Rite of Spring. So I took that record home and I put it on the record player that I had purloined from my sisters, and it shattered me. It horrified me. I think I got all the way through it maybe twice. And I took it back to her. I said, "Mrs. Carl, I can't imagine why anybody would listen to music that sounds like this." And she was totally cool. She took it back. She said, "That's perfectly all right," without comment. A few days later, I wake up early one morning. There's a shaft of sunlight coming in the bedroom, and I can hear a few bars of The Rite of Spring in my head. And I couldn't think of what came next. "Mrs. Carl, can I borrow that?" And I've recognized that my whole life. I didn't go get The Rite of Spring. The Rite of Spring came and got me. So that's the way that happened. Mr. Bechtel with those Kenton records, and Mrs. Carl with that Rite of Spring. A couple of pretty good stories about how music came and got me.
Those are amazing stories.
Well, they are. And it's also a story about how we learn. In neither case was it about, "Oh, I'm going to learn this." It just happened.
Absolutely. After those early formative experiences, you went on to perform with the Woody Herman Orchestra and also served in the Navy. How did those chapters of your life influence the way you approach your music, your craft, and eventually your leadership of ensembles?
Well, when I got out of high school, I had a GPA of about 2.5. I knew that my father was not interested in investing in a college education for me. And so when I considered my options, I visited the Navy recruiter who offered me a package I couldn't refuse. The day after I graduated from high school, I got on an airplane and I flew with my trombone to the Great Lakes Naval Training Center in Great Lakes, Michigan, where I auditioned for the Navy School of Music. The recruiter had given me a deal where if I passed the audition, I'd be enrolled at the Navy school. If I didn't pass the audition, I didn't have to join the Navy. If I said, "Take me home," they'd take me home. Well, I passed the audition very handily. And so I endured boot camp for 9 weeks. Next thing I knew, I was enrolled at the Navy School of Music just outside of Washington, D.C. I was in the middle of 500 other music students. So I was no longer the big fish in the little pond. Well, I'd say I was, an average fish. I think I would place myself at about maybe the 65th or 70th percentile in terms of my skills, ability, and background and everything. But my interest couldn't have been topped. So I met a lot of great guys. The classes were good. The ensembles were good. The lessons were good. But most of my learning was from the guys around me. "Hey, you, what is that you just did? How do you do that?" And there were a lot of guys with record players, so I learned about Miles Davis and John Coltrane and Bobby Timmons and Horace Silver. My education became broader quickly.
Wow, that must have been an incredible environment to learn in. After the Navy, you returned to Columbus, and before long, you were invited to join the Woody Herman Orchestra. What was it like stepping into a band at that level?
The way I got on the band was I had played a show downtown at the Ohio Theater with Peggy Lee. The whole band was from Columbus, except her first trumpet player was a guy from Cincinnati that I had never heard of named Frank Brown. In the middle of the show, we were on an intermission, and I look up and Frank Brown is walking toward me. He steps up and he says, "You sound real good." I said, "Thanks, so do you." He said, "Do you want to go on the road?" I said, "Well, as long as it's not too dumb of a scene, sure, I'd go on the road." He goes, "I'm going to recommend you to Woody Herman." And he turns around and walks away.
Jeez.
So that was in May of 1974. In August, one day the phone rang, and that was it. And I called Mr. Bechtel. I said, "What do I do?" He said, "If you don't do this, I'll never speak to you again." So I called Bill Byrne, and he arranged for my flight to Nashville, and I joined the band in Nashville playing a dance gig. And I'm sitting there going, holy smoke, these guys really play. I thought, these guys are going to ship me home in a box. That first month or so, I would call home and I was told my voice sounded real small. I finally relaxed, and thank God they kept me.
Was your family happy for you?
Well, sure. After I'd been on the band maybe a year or so, we came to town and played at a place called the Grandview Inn. And on that night, Woody knew I was homeboy. On a normal night, I had about 3, maybe 4 solos in one night. Well, that night I was soloing on everything. We'd start playing, and Woody'd look at me. He'd point, like, "Let's go, get down here." He'd get me down front. "All right, you're blowing." Get big cheers from everybody and all that stuff, right? But at the end of it, I got a great validation from my dad. My dad said, "Vaughn, you're at the top of your profession. Music to my ears."
That's incredible that Woody really gave you the spotlight that night. So, just in the early stages of your career, you get back from Woody Herman and then head to Capital University. And you essentially helped found the Jazz Studies program at Capital University.
Well, of course, the guy that did that was Eubanks. Interestingly, a year later, Ohio State founded their jazz studies. When they saw what Ray had done, said, "Oops, hey, let's pull this together." I'd like to say a few words about Eubanks in terms of my relationship to him. Ray is the guy that used me to write an arrangement and then write another one and then write another one. So if I'm an arranger, it's because of Ray. If I'm a teacher, it's because of Ray, because he's the one that believed in me more than I believed in myself. He sat me down. He said, "I'd like you to become part of this program I'm setting up here. And I want you to lead a band. I want you to teach arranging. And I want you to teach jazz history." I said, "Ray, I don't know anything about jazz history." He said, "You will."
And you're living it.
That too, right? So the 3 major guys in my life, my father, Mr. Bechtel, and Ray Eubanks. I owe my life to those 3 guys.
So, you came back to Columbus and continued building the jazz community here. Then time goes by, and in 1997, you start the famous Jazz Orchestra. Why did you decide to do that? What inspired it?
I'm glad you asked that question. I got a call back in the mid-90s to sit in with a band in Cincinnati called the Blue Wisp Big Band. They named themselves after the first club they played in. It was led by John Von Ohlen, who most famously played drums for Stan Kenton. John's style of drumming was just fantastic. I got to sit in with that band, and the deal with that band was you made $10. You played every Wednesday. So I sat in with those guys 2 or 3 or 4 times, and it just kind of took shape in my mind. I thought, in Columbus, we don't have anything like this. We've got Jazz Arts playing concerts. We've got everybody else playing social gigs. We don't have anybody playing cabaret-style big band. And I just thought, that's what I want to do.
Ah, that was your light bulb moment. What made you decide on Monday nights?
I first started on Wednesdays.
Oh, that's funny.
We started at a place that was called the Olentangy Inn, which is now known as the Cap City Diner. They had a diner, and the bar was a fairly spacious room, lots of carpeting and everything. It was a good sounding room. The geometry was such that there were no standing waves, so the band sounded good in there. The place was a little dingy. I called it the Old and Dingy Inn. But it was a very pleasant place to play, and that lasted about a year and a half until a new manager came in, and that put a stop to that. And shortly after that, I lost my job at Capitol.
Oh no. All of that in 1 year?
I had 17 great years there. I got nothing but thanks in my heart for my experience at Capitol University. I learned so much. I'm the case in point that it's the teacher that learns the most. Every time a student looks at me and says, Vaughn, I learned so much from you, I tell them, man, I learned just as much from you or more. But that's what inspired me to start the band. And naming the band, we first got started at the Old and Dingy Inn. I'm sitting there thinking, well, I need a name for the band. And all of a sudden, it appeared in my head an old 78 RPM Black Label RCA Victor 78, Duke Ellington and his famous orchestra. And boom, I had the name for the band.
What were some of the challenges of getting your band up and running in the early years?
Just getting guys that are willing to do it for practically nothing. I decided from the outset, anybody that said, I'm not doing it for that, I wouldn't blame them. I had the equipment. I've been collecting arrangements my whole life, so I had plenty of book. When I first started at Capitol, Ray gave me the third band. By the end of the year, the third band was outplaying the second band. The following year, to my amazement, Ray gave me the first band. It blew my mind.
That's crazy.
I'm going to tell you another little story. I'm in 8th grade. It's Christmas time. People in our church gathered and are going to stand on the front porch in the cold and sing Christmas carols. Now, as a kid, I loved Christmas carols because they sounded so pretty, and year after year, they became familiar. So I knew how they went and all that. So we get to this one person's house, and I'm standing next to a grown-up guy. We're singing Little Town of Bethlehem, and he's singing different notes. How does he know? How's he doing that? A week or so later, I'm in class in school, and we had a lady, Miss Eberly, who would come in, and we'd have a music class. We had these books with old work songs and folk songs and stuff like that. And well, she would lead us in singing. So she's up front, and we're singing. And I couldn't define it, but what I was doing was I was dropping down a third. I now know that that's what I was doing. And she detected that I was doing this. She made no indication to the rest of the class that I was doing that. She very slowly came over and stood next to me. While the class is singing, she begins singing the harmony part. And she showed me that the harmony doesn't always go the same way that the melody goes. Sometimes the melody goes up, the harmony goes down. That was my very first music lesson. And then she walked away, and that was it. We never exchanged a word. I'll never forget Miss Eberly.
Wow, you're so lucky to have had such a unique ear training experience. Speaking of luck, you've certainly had it, and FJO has too, getting to perform in so many different venues over the years. What's been your favorite place to play? And I'm guessing your least favorite might still be the Olentangy Inn?
I wouldn't say it was my least favorite. We enjoyed playing there. It was the right kind of atmosphere. I wanted informal. I want people to come and go in the middle of a tune, go get a beer, whatever. So I've enjoyed every place we've played. And one of the big pluses, every single place we've played, They had a real piano. Thank you, God.
Yeah, no kidding.
The new one is no exception. There's always been a piano for us. What I have to say about Boulevard Presbyterian Church is it's the best sounding room we've ever had. The result is the band is improving. There's no mistaking the band is playing better. And not only that, we're adding mezzo piano to our dynamic range, which I've never been able to do before. Now we have a chance. We've got access to the low end of the dynamic spectrum for the first time. And we're being welcomed. These people, they're like almost deliriously happy that we're there. So how do you beat that?
Do you think that's what keeps your musicians and your audience coming back? Being happy to be there?
The guys make $10 every night. If they don't have a good time, they might as well stay home because there's no money. Result, I have a happy band. They're there not for money, but to play. I categorize the band as what's commonly known in the profession as a kicks band. Now, there's all kinds of levels of kicks bands. On that scale, from 1 to 10, I'd put us at about an 8 or a 9. It's an excellent band. It's not a virtuoso band. That has been proven many times. But it's a really good band. And the intent is there for everybody. Everybody understands I'm here to do my best. I want the chart to sound good. I want the band to sound good. They all know that. And I don't have to be a taskmaster. But every now and then, hey, you guys, but not often. And especially now, because they can hear so much better.
That's got to be one of the great things about that space. Whenever I'm on the bandstand or even sitting in the audience, I notice such an interesting mix of people. There are people who have been part of the scene for decades, and then I see younger musicians and listeners mixed in as well. Do you think FJO plays a role in bringing those generations of jazz lovers together?
When I was in high school, Mr. Bechtel played in a grown-up band led by a guy named Riley Norris, and the whole book was custom written. It was an absolute explosion in my mind to play in that band. Bechtel got me on that band with the grown-up guys. There's no way to quantify what that did for me. So I've always recognized that with this band, I've got the chance to pass that on. Hey, kid, sit here. Ride the beast. What matters is not whether they're real good. What matters is whether they care to do it. That was done for me. So I get the chance to pass it on. Lucky me. Look what I get to do.
Yeah, that's really special. Something else I've noticed is how the band balances tradition with more modern charts. You'll hear classic big band charts, but every once in a while you'll program something newer, like Logan Moore's Mario Kart arrangements. How do you approach keeping that balance?
If something sounds good, I'm ready to play it. My basic orientation for the band is the music I grew up with, which was 50s jazz, which is what I consider mainstream jazz. It's post-bop, so it takes advantage of all the advances made in bebop, but it mixes them in with other stuff, especially Lester Young. So there's that modifying element where things smooth out quite a bit. So it's considered mainstream jazz, 50s, and it goes up to fusion jazz. And that's where they weren't wrong to do that. They literally had to do that. They could not be playing Stardust and Old Man River, and they'd be out of business in a hurry. So they did what they had to do. As far as I can see, fusion jazz ended up being a blind alley. Where is it now? And how much literature is still around? For me, the core sound of the band is 50s big band, Count Basie, Woody Herman, Stan Kenton, with a smattering of Ellington, not much. Because we're too big to play Ellington, for one thing. The band's too big. We're not teetotalers when it comes to the 40s or the 60s, but not a lot going on. There's just too much from the 50s that I want to play. So what I say to people, especially to educators, is We must preserve that literature. If you think your job is to preserve jazz, you better preserve the literature.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other.
Your students need to not only understand a bunch of styles of jazz, but they need to know some literature. It blew my mind when I realized that when I got out of Mount Vernon High School, I knew a bunch of tunes because of Mr. Bechtel and the Mellow Jackets, and because of Riley's band, and because of the records I was listening to.
This feels like a full circle moment. Your education at Mount Vernon and your time with Mr. B and the Yellow Jackets helped shape so much of your career. The word legacy comes to mind. How do you hope your work, especially with FJO, will be remembered?
I'm kind of like Frank Zappa on that. If I'm remembered, I hope I'm remembered as somebody that was nice and shared music, because that's what it's for. Give it as widely as you can. Anybody that is even slightly interested, man, just fan the flames. So I get to do that. I don't give myself credit for that. I'm so fortunate that I'm in a position to do that. The credit goes to the people that shared it with me. Miss Eberly, Mrs. Carl, Mr. Bechtel, Mr. Stow, Eubanks, Riley Norris, that band. Lucky me.
Throughout this whole interview, I was struck by how little time Vaughn spent talking about himself. As musicians, we're often expected to carry a little bit of ego to justify how good we think we are. But here was someone who couldn't stop talking about the people who shaped him. A Midwest kid with a horrible GPA who grew into one of the finest trombonists in Columbus. A true hometown hero, armed with a trombone and a handful of dad jokes, whose legacy continues to grow. While this episode focuses on Vaughn, let it also serve as a reminder. We aren't defined by our experiences, but by the people who make those experiences possible. Just as Vaughn was shaped by so many mentors, I've also been shaped by mine. My mom and brother, my band directors, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Pelfrey, my trombone professor at Capitol, Dr. Weinkel, and my friends and colleagues at Capitol, who shared the stage with me and helped bring this episode to life. Finally, it's important to remember that while Vaughn and the Famous Jazz Orchestra have influenced the Columbus jazz scene, they only represent a part of it. There are countless talented trombonists, musicians, and jazz lovers who each deserve their own story. Vaughn and FJO aren't perfect, but they're always there, every Monday night, ready to play and waiting for you to walk in. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Bonecast, where we talk all things trombone with the people who love it most. A huge thank you to Jeff Banyotz, Matt Ellis, Kyson Orrick, Lucas Reitz, and Vaughn Weister for sharing their time and stories. And a special thanks to Deb Fote, Stokes McIntyre, and Mindfort Studios for helping bring parts of this episode to life. We're also grateful to Kevin Chu and Mark at Dropbox for their support. Music for this episode was provided by Pixabay, the Boston Symphony Orchestra, the Famous Jazz Orchestra, and Wikimedia Commons. And, of course, thank you to you, our listeners. Your curiosity and support are what make these conversations possible. If you'd like to support the show, visit thebonecast.com and be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook for behind-the-scenes content and special announcements. Now, I think there's one thing I'm forgetting. Vaughn?
Don't take no wooden nickels.
I'm your host, Gracie Westergaard. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.